Dr. Jazz. Dr. Jazz.
Like a while ago.
Oh my God,
And,
yeah.
You know, he's one of the giants of, let's say, avant-garde modern trumpet, if we want to, jazz trumpet, if we want to put it like that. And you know, I've listened to the Macro Quartet, and it's incredible, you and Herb together, and especially, you know, you have Drew and Tom as a rhythm section, which makes it even more amazing. But I listened to the record on Bandcamp, and I wanted to ask you, how did you hook up with Herb, and because it's, you know, two trumpets, very unusual. Not many lineups I know with two trumpets, actually. So, but how did that band happen, actually?
Well, so basically, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to. I have a tendency to talk on and on. So
oh man, please.
to keep it short.
No. It's just go there. I love this. So.
Well, I first became aware of Herb through some friends who had you know, were raving about him, talking about him, and then, you know, this was like 1990, early 1990s, and I didn't have any records of him or anything. So the first time I actually heard him was at the Vancouver Jazz Festival in 1992.
Oh wow!
I was there with a band called Orange Then Blue.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and he was there. Well, I don't know exactly who he was there with at the time, but he was doing an afternoon concert with a band that they put together, which was like Bobby Previtt and Mark Dresser and Walter Verbaus.
Oh,
and
wow.
I was like, okay, I'm going to go hear this guy, Herb Robertson, and see what this is all about. And I have to, you know, so in all honesty, when he started playing, I was like, what is this? You know, this is, I don't think I like this. And an hour later, I was hooked. I was like, oh my God, this guy's like the most, he's like the best improviser I've ever heard in my life. It's totally pure improvising, and it's genius. So from that point, I was like, you know, I checked out everything I could about him. When I finally moved to New York, I just went to as many performances of his that I could hear, and then we started playing some things together. Sometimes he would sub in Orange Then Blue, and so I got to talk to him and get to know him some. And then we both played in Satoko Fuji's large ensemble.
Oh yeah, exactly.
And so we did a lot of her records. And so through the years, you know, we started getting to know each other. And finally, one day I just said, hey man, why don't we try to do something together? And so that's how it kind of started. We talked about it, and the funny thing about that record is that we both, I don't know if Herb told you this story, but we both were going to write music for this.
No, he didn't. No. Oh, well.
Yeah, and so like for the recording is this two sets that we did at the Stone.
Yeah.
And so we were going to do a rehearsal before the gig, and both Herb and I wrote this stuff, you know, and it was like kind of like graphic scores and stuff, you know, improvisers type of stuff. And so we set up, and Herb gives his charts to Drew and Tom, and I give my charts to Drew and Tom, and Tom looks at it and goes, really? We're not going to do this, right? He says, we're improvisers. We don't need to do this. And both Herb were like, yeah, you're right. So we went and had dinner and then came back and played the gig. So, but I like that record, and I like that you brought it up, because I think that you know, that particular record is I felt very good about it, because you know, I didn't like really try to copy Herb or follow him around. I just kind of became a different voice in it, and it was kind of a big moment for me personally and musically, to be able to I don't want to say hold my own, but to have my own part in it, you know. And that was a big, I think it was a big step for me. And yeah, I really enjoy that record. We actually did a tour after that.
In Europe or no?
Yeah, in Europe.
Really?
Yeah, we did a tour in 2009.
Oh,
And
wow.
I recorded every gig. Like we had like 9 gigs, and I
Serious?
recorded them
Wow.
all. So they're all sitting there.
Oh, man.
I don't know if everything would come of them, but that was
Well,
that was a trip to be able to play like that every night. For 9 gigs in a row, and each gig was totally different.
yeah,
And
sure.
we really, I mean, there might have been some similarities of things if you go back and listen to it, but everybody's got their things that they do in common, but basically the music was really great. It was just improvised each night, and really exciting and different. So
Wow. Wow. But also with Drew and Tom, that was the band actually. I mean,
no, well, Tom was on the tour. Drew couldn't make the tour. There was this really great bass player from the Netherlands that did it. Jeez, I'm blanking on his name. 'Cause
mm.
I only met him that one time. But anyway, he was.
Oh, Wilbert, the Yoda, maybe? No.
Yes, exactly.
Oh,
Yeah,
Wilbert.
yeah,
Yeah, sure.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
wow, man.
yeah. He was, boy. He
Yeah, I
was
played with him
incredible.
once. Yeah, he's a
Yeah,
monster player. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Boy,
wow.
I was really blown away by him just because his whole approach
Yeah.
to music was so open and so like fearless. Really. Yeah, I hate to use those terms like that, fearless and
No,
stuff,
no, I know. Yeah, but I know what you
but
mean.
he was because it was. I mean, saying fearless is more a reflection of the fear I have. So, really,
Oh, but that's amazing, man. You should put that on Bandcamp, at least 1 or 2 gigs. Really,
yeah, I have to
would
dig
be
them up.
nice.
I did digitize them all, so
Oh,
they're
wow.
somewhere. But yeah,
Oh,
maybe.
that'd be beautiful.
So anyway, when we reissued the recording last year and then put the
Yeah.
second set of that night together, we had a couple gigs lined up, and then COVID canceled them all. So
Oh, man.
I'm still hoping to be able to revive that at some point. So
Yeah, to bring this group to Europe also. Like, you a couple of years later, all with a different approach maybe, and it would be fun to hear you guys live. I think
yeah, yeah. I
it
mean,
would.
it's we've all. I mean, everybody grows as
Yeah,
they go. So it would be interesting to see. I mean, it's really 12 years later. I
yeah,
mean, I think it was 2009 when
would be
that.
amazing.
Well, that was when the tour was. The record I think was 2007. So
Wow. Yeah, man, it's like we need you out there.
yeah,
But
well,
it's
yeah. I mean,
incredible.
playing with Herb is incredible. It was really. It's just. I felt like we really clicked. We really
Yeah,
had a
you did.
thing.
Yeah. I mean, what I've heard on that record, at least, it's beautiful how you gelled together, and it's such a nice sound you created. But
Thanks.
you mentioned Herb also as that you searched for his records.
Hmm.
When you saw him in Vancouver, like, but who were like the guys, let's say late 70s or early 80s that got you excited really for improvisation, like the jazz trumpet wise or jazz even, like what was that album? I mean, I know my albums that when I was a teenager that blew my mind, and I want to do
Well,
that. Or what was your moment there?
well, that's kind of a funny thing. I mean, um, I guess if I have to be honest, the very first one was a Maynard Ferguson record.
Wow, okay. Okay, well, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's like my older brother would come home from high school with these records that he would borrow from his band director, and there was this one Maynard Ferguson live at Jimmy's, which is
Hmm.
like and that was like my first like, wow, this is. I mean, now I go back and listen to that band, and it's like they had a real energy, and it was
Yeah.
really a great. That was a great band, but so I think that was the first thing that got me excited about improvising and all that, and well, not so much improvising, but kind of playing the trumpet in what jazz is to say. But then quickly, I got exposed to Clifford Brown, and Woody Shaw was kind of probably the first guy that got me really interested
Oh, wow.
in
Okay.
improvising. And it's funny because at this, I kind of was in a kind of a traditional route at that point, like kind of like big bands and all that. But the thing was, when I was like 17, I bought a subscription to Downbeat, and the thing was, Downbeat was always at that time we're putting in articles about the Art Ensemble Chicago and the AACM and Roscoe
Hmm.
Mitchell and these people I had never heard of. And so that was way outside of my experience, but I was kind of like interested. And at the same time, there was a radio station in Boston. I'm from Rhode Island, and we
Oh,
could
okay.
get this station in Boston, GBH. Sorry. Anyway, they had a program that was jazz after hours, and it would go all night from like midnight till 6 in the morning or something. And so me in my little world where I lived, I was thinking like, well, man, it'd be great if I put that on overnight. I could like get it through osmosis, and they were playing all that music, the art ensemble and David Murray and these things. And so that was kind of like the music I was hearing subconsciously.
Wow.
But then, I was a trumpet player in high school, and, they had, then in college, and it was like, big band world, And so I was kind of aware of all that music, but I didn't really know that much about it. I really kind of started to study, music like that more after I got out of college, and after I got, I was on the big bands for a couple of years, a Timothy Dorsey band, a Woody Herman band.
Oh, wow.
And after that, I was like, I don't think I really belonged in those bands. I didn't really feel, I was like, it was great. I could play enough to keep the gig, but so anyway, when I got off the road with those bands, it was like that was the music that I was really drawn to, and felt like there was something, something resonated personally with me there. So of course, then people like Lester Bowie came into the picture, and Don Cherry was a huge influence. Don Cherry mostly because the world I came from, people, they really denigrated Don Cherry, terrible trumpet player, and this and that. And I'm like, but listen to what he's playing. I mean, he was playing things that no other trumpet player in the world would dare play, and it was just startling, And of course, Miles was a big influence at that point too, just because, that was probably more accessible to me orally, and I could hear. I could kind of hear what was going on with him trumpet wise, but then I had to figure out what was going on with the rhythm sections, which was like that really opened up the whole thing, because then it's like, well, okay, this ain't about the trumpet,
Exactly.
The trumpet's just a vehicle here, and of course you got to deal with the trumpet. I mean, you got to figure out how to play the damn thing, but it kind of did open me up to think about the music in a bigger picture rather than just my instrument. And it was a little dissonance at the time, because going through school and all that, everybody's like the trumpet, and some people, and so, but I kind of, I had some really good teachers and some good mentors that kind of helped me foster that idea that, it's more than just the trumpet. It's about the music.
You were at Berkeley, right? Or in the 80s?
Yeah.
Or no? Yeah.
Yeah, I went to Berkeley, but I went as an older student. I had already gone to the University of Rhode Island for 2 years.
Okay.
And I got kind of kicked out of the University of Rhode Island and ended up going to Berkeley. But I was really lucky because Herb Pomeroy and Greg Hopkins were two guys that I got to work really closely with. There was a guy, Jimmy Mosier, who really helped me a lot. And so, they kind of saw what was going on and were like, okay, this kid needs some help. Let me see what I can do for him.
No, that's beautiful. I mean, yeah. But you mentioned that the move to New York after seeing Herb in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And, I guess then 94, 93, something like that, when you moved to New York. How did you decide to do that? And how was your first reaction coming to the New York scene in the 90s, which was, blooming there then, with all these musicians coming from Seattle and from everywhere? Like, it was, how was this, how did you gel in, and how was the beginning in New York for you?
Well, so I was just about 30 when I moved to New York. And the thing was, I was in Boston at that point, and because I was in Orange and Blue in that group, George Schuer led that group, but they were great players, and they had like Chris Speed and Andrew D'Angelo and Dave Douglas and Kung Fu. Curtis Hasselbring was in that a bunch. Anyway, so I was in that band with those guys when they lived in Boston, and then they all moved to New York. So at that point, I was in Boston, like kind of like, okay, I'd go to New York to do gigs with the band and then come home. But I was very, I was kind of frustrated living in Boston for different reasons. And, but I was really afraid of New York. I was afraid, I'm from a very small town, and for me, New York was like this jungle. Oh my God, what am I going to do? So believe it or not, one weekend, Dave Douglas allowed me to stay at his apartment. So I went down and hung out at Dave's apartment, followed him around, and I kind of remember walking around going like, this ain't so bad. I could live here. This could be cool. And so I just, told people, okay, I think I'm going to move. And Andrew D'Angelo knew a guy who was looking for a roommate, this guy Arnold Hammerschlag, who's a trumpet player. And so I ended up moving into this apartment with Arnold, and it was funny because I actually was paying less rent in New York than I was in Boston. And so my whole reason for moving to New York was I wanted to kind of follow these guys and be part of this music scene. But because I had done that other big band world, I knew a lot of guys that were working in different things, shows and weddings. And like one guy who was also really helpful to me was Tim Hagens.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. I met Tim when I was at Berkeley, and I took a bunch of lessons with him. And, he's always been such a great guy. He's an amazing guy. And, he's the type of guy I would call him up and say, hey, Tim, what about this? And he'd tell me things, and it was great. So, I told him, hey, I'm thinking about moving to New York. He's like, great, move to New York. That's what you got to do. So I'm like, okay. So I moved to New York on a Wednesday. I called him up and said, hey, Tim, I'm here. He goes, great. Can you sub in Maria Schneider's band Monday night at Vision Ponies? And I was like, I guess so. So, so I fell into some things quite quickly. There was a trumpet player named Tony Cadlick who was close to, who's does a lot of that work, and he's like the guy in the city, and he recommended me for a lot of things. So I ended up, it was kind of weird in a way, because I was kind of in these two worlds where it was like, go to people's apartments in Brooklyn and play sessions and play free music and stuff, and then go play a wedding or go sub on a Broadway show. Or there was one day where I, in the morning, I played a rehearsal for the Brandenburg Concerto No. 2. In the afternoon, I played a matinee at a Broadway show. And then in the evening, I played a set with Joe Manieri at the Knit.
Oh, so man.
I was like, wow, I did it.
Yeah, that's like, yeah. Wow.
So it was cool. I mean, it's amazing to be able to do all that stuff. But at the same time, I wanted to dig deeper into things that I felt musically were really rewarding, So, but I was great. there was so much going on in the city that, I was lucky to be able to do a lot of it.
Yeah. I mean, you've been like, I watched from YouTube the other day, like from Fifth House, a live one that you did with Munder. Being a guitarist, you cannot avoid Ben Munder's influence. If my generation, and and Matt Wilson on drums, and man, you're burning it. So you basically like became a band leader very quickly after coming to New York, right? I mean,
well, that's just one of the things you have to do as a horn player. I mean, as a rhythm section player, you have people are looking for drummers and bass players and blah, blah. But as a horn player, nobody's necessarily looking for a trumpet player to play in your quartet. I mean, they're looking for a personality. They're looking for. So it was kind of clear to me when I was in Boston that you kind of you got to do things yourself. You especially as a horn player. So I just started, putting things together, and that gig particularly, that was like 3 blocks from where I was living, and they were, just happened to ask me if I wanted to do a set there, and so there was, I think that band, we did a demo with that band. We might have done a couple other gigs, but But I was doing gigs at Cornelia Street Cafe quite a bit. And the Internet Cafe, that was a big
Yeah.
one. We did a lot of stuff. That was where Tony Malaby and I played there a lot. And
Yeah, how did the connection with Tony? I mean, I've played with Tony quite some and did some records, and he's one of my favorite musicians ever, like the most creative. And you played with him a lot also. How did the story with Tony begin? You guys?
Well, it actually started with Angie Sanchez.
Yeah,
because
yes.
Angie and I were at Sandpoint Festival in, I guess it was '93. This is before I moved to New York, and or it might have been, I don't know. I went there twice. I think it might have been. I might have met her the second time I was there. I might have already been in New York, but anyway, she and Tony were boyfriend girlfriend at that point, and then they got married,
and then
and so I met her first, and that was a festival that Gunther Schuller put together, and we would spend like 2 weeks just working on music with people, and some great musicians there. That's actually where I met Joe Lovano and Billy Hart too. So Angie and I we noticed there was a connection, and it was great. And she's like, "Oh, you got to meet Tony. We're moving to New York." And so when they moved to New York, it was like I met Tony, and we just started playing, and it was just there was a thing right from the beginning that we have kind of an uncanny connection, I think, where it happens pretty rarely with other improvisers, but with Tony, it's like once we get into it, we end up sometimes playing like the same melodies, and it's like, where the hell did that come from? But I love playing with Tony. We used to do these sessions at his house in Jersey City, where we'd just play for like 3 hours without stopping. Wow. And it was like we called it jazz camp, because that's a whole nother reference to that. But the whole point was like we just felt like the longer we played, the more we would get past all the stuff and start really playing. And those are great moments. I miss those a lot. But we'll find those moments again.
Yeah, I mean that's why, of course, Tony is then amongst ourselves also, right? Your debut as a band leader.
Yeah,
it makes
right.
Sense.
Yeah.
That's. I mean, you can feel this connection, like I love it how some of those tunes that you've written, like the rubato melodies and the beautiful melodies, like, and you're just like wings, like all about Joey and Be Do and some other stuff on that album. I listen to that a lot, and it's so beautiful how you did it. So.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a really great session.
Nice record. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
When you wrote the music for that record or any other records later, how did you? What's your process here? I mean, if I ask you here, like when you write music, are you one of those guys who just write like, okay, I'm recording in 1 month, I need now 8 tunes, or like picking up ideas through time? And
well, I guess I have to make a confession first about amongst ourselves, is that that record is mostly improvised. There's a few the tunes.
Yeah, the few melodies. Yeah.
Yeah, the ones you mentioned are written out. Like there's a line written out. Yeah. There's a Be Do was one of Tony's tunes that he needed for something, and All About Joey was a line that I wrote.
Yeah.
But most of the other ones were all improvised because when I got called by Niels Winter to do a Steeplechase record, I was given advice by older players that don't give him any of your music, because he takes 50% of the copyright and you'll never see anything for it. And so Tony and Mike Formanek and Jeff Williams were playing as a trio, and actually they had a gig at the Internet Cafe the night before our session, and I went to the gig and I just sat there and kind of imagined myself in there. Then the next day we went to the session, and I told them that so the plan is we're going to kind of do what Paul Bley does. We're going to improvise and put a title to it. Except I had to go the other way, because I had all the titles, and then I would say, and I had to convince Niels that we were a band that had been rehearsing, and I think he found out by now because he doesn't want to do any more records with me, so I think he's probably angry with me at this point. But the whole thing was, I would say a title, and I would say like Tony and Mike start, and then we would improvise.
Yeah.
But we all had the sensibility of structure, of how to create structure.
It sounds quite composed, actually. Yeah, like.
Yeah, that's kind of
like,
how,
yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of we all collectively come to music with a sense of wanting to create a structure. Of course, improvisation can be all these different things at the same time. I mean, we could have a piece that sounds like structure. We could have a piece that doesn't sound like structure.
Yep.
It's all part of the same package. But that particular record, we all knew what the game was, and so we got through the record, and at the end of the whole thing, Niels was like, "Dave, that's great music. Sounds great. You're really." And I'm like, so I have to confess that one, I think, I better become clean first to say that there was very little composing on that record. But how I approach composing is basically I approach it as an improviser. So I do write better when I have a deadline.
Yeah.
I have, it gives me a context on how to bring the musical thoughts into a package. I mean, the rest of the time I'm always working on to develop as an improviser. So I think that improvisation and composition is really the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I approach it that way. And so when I do have to write things, it happens pretty quickly. I kind of think about the context, the players, the instrumentation, and then things start to, I start to get ideas, and I'll start jotting down ideas. Sometimes it's just words, sometimes it's actual notes and phrases. And depending on how much time I have, I'll work it. If I have no time, I'll make, they tend to be kind of short things that improvisers can go from. If I need to write something longer, then I have to plan it out. Like I did, I've written some pieces for the Meridian Arts Ensemble.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is a brass quintet. There's no improvisation in it. And, I have to know, I have to give myself time to work those things out and let them come. But it tends to happen pretty quickly. Another piece I wrote recently was I wrote a piece for Ellery Eskelin, and it's a piece for bass, cello, 2 violins, bassoon, clarinet, and piano. And it's 8 movements long, and it's basically everything for the ensemble is written, and he improvises through the piece. And that came rather quickly, but it took a lot of time thinking about it, so the actual notating of the work is fairly quick, but I'm working on a couple pieces now for a concert I have in a couple weeks, and I'm liking the fact that I'm giving myself more time to work through the material more. So that's ultimately I approach it as an improviser. I have different methodologies I'll enter the work with, but at the end of the day, I don't really try to follow any particular formula or any particular process. I kind of let the piece tell me what it needs or what it wants. The hard part is just deciding when it's done,
Exactly.
I could keep going, it's like, okay, I could keep editing and keep changing this and changing that, and at some point, that's why deadlines are good, because it's like, okay, I got to make a decision here. Gotta finish. Yeah. It's
like finishing an improv. Maybe it's time. If you don't have anything to say, you're like, okay.
Well, I mean, it's, like with an improv, there's several times it can end. It's like which one is the ending? Is this just the beginning of a new section, or is this the ending?
Yeah.
So.
But you said you were writing for players also, and I wanted to ask you, when I check your discography or listen to your records, you played like with the best of the New York creative scene. I mean, like John Hebert, Mike Formanek, Tom Rainey. If I just go through the rhythm sections, and Randy Peterson, I love Randy. Like,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How did all these bands come together for all these records? Like, were these like working groups or just like sessions? And how did you like Billy Drew's? You have, I love that one with Billy. That's beautiful. Like, how did these groups happen? I mean, and records.
Well, it's different for the Steeplechase records. They were basically one-offs. It's like,
Okay.
I have these people that I had played with, so I would know how things could go. So those records all had to happen really quickly. I think I broke a record where one of them was actually under 3 hours. To maybe it was like 2.5 hours, and we had a record or something like that.
We did it in two. I did my first record. I did my first record in New York with Malaby, Mark Elias, and Tom Rainey. We recorded it in 2 hours, man.
Yeah, I mean,
I couldn't believe that. I was like, this is how this works, and it sounded amazing, like.
Well, but these are people that are. This is what they do.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like after a while. I mean, it's like, how are you going to improve on what you just did? I mean, it's just going to be different. It may not be better.
Yeah.
So with those particular records, it was I'd have plan A, B, and C. Like I'd have the group. I'd think about how the group was going to sound together, because we didn't rehearse for any of those records. And I would have like the first plan that I want, and if that wasn't going to, if we got in the session and that wasn't working, I'd have another idea.
That's smart, yeah.
And then if that wasn't working, I'd have another idea. So, I mean, the groups with Malaby and Billy Drews and Mike and Tom and Hebert, those were easy, because those guys, I knew those guys, and those guys, you don't tell them what to do. You just give them formats for them to do it, right? It's like, yeah, well, how are you? I mean, they're amazing players, right? That's what they do. They're going to bring, my job is to bring something too, right? Some of the other records, I didn't know the players that well, and I was more told by Niels who to use.
Oh, wow, okay.
So there's a record there with George Colligan. There's a couple records and George is a great player too.
Yeah, amazing guy. Yeah.
I didn't really know his playing that well, and so I'd try things and then see how they worked, and then I had my plans A, B, and C, and how they all worked out. I felt like those records were they came off well. I wish I had more time to work with those records and be able to maybe do things in a different way, but that was the opportunity that presented itself. And I was lucky to do 8 of them for sure, right?
A lot, yeah.
But I think the records I've done since then, I've been able to put more thought into, and they're more kind of they're just in a different focus. There's one that I really like. That hasn't gotten a lot of notice. Was this one? It's called it's this band called Beep Honk. It's Anthony. Yeah, it's on Clean Feed. It's Anthony Pirog on guitar, and Adam Hopkins on bass, and a drummer, Mike Kuhl.
Oh, check it out. Okay. Oh, okay, super.
Yeah, that's a really great one. So anyway, there's like, the Steeplechase records are, I wish I still had an opportunity to do them, but I don't think so. Yeah.
No, but you mentioned Clean Feet, and I wanted to ask you about the solo trumpet thing that you did, and because that's amazing. Especially, I listened to the other day to the quadrants for solo trumpet, which I find fascinating because they're like 15 minutes around long. Mm-hmm. Solo trumpet, and also the solo trumpet on Clean Feet. And I wanted to ask you, how did you approach those records, or even like solo trumpet playing situations in a live situation? How do you do a 1 hour gig or a recording just solo trumpet? What's your map or plan? Like, let's say, how do you do that?
Well, for the solo trumpet stuff, it started off mostly as like I was trying to find a way to break through a certain block I felt I was having creatively. I was it wasn't too long after I had been doing this teaching job that I have now. I had done that for about 10 years, and the reason I took the job was because I wanted more opportunity to kind of explore my own stuff, but then I got involved in administrative stuff, and I got all kinds of I was still busy playing, but I just felt like creatively I wasn't quite getting there. I was kind of, there was a block. So Ellery Eskelin suggested to me, I was talking to him about this, and he says, well, you should just play solo, do a solo concert, just do that. And so I did that. I did a solo concert, and I was like, okay, I got through that okay. But as I prepared for these recordings, I was like checking out every solo trumpet record that's ever been done. I mean, Wadada's records are ridiculous, and he's kind of got that all figured out. Of course, Peter Evans. And,
that's a different level. Yeah, that's like really...
Yeah, and Nate Woolley and Hugh Reagan. Hugh Reagan has an amazing solo trumpet record, and
I really have to check it out.
Yeah, there's another guy, Scott Tinkler from Australia. Incredible trumpet players, right? And they have these solo records. So I really prepared for that. I practiced exploring different things. And part of it was I got a sabbatical from the school that was my sabbatical project, But I was like, so I really dug into some different things that I hadn't given myself time to do. And so when it came time to do the record again, I had my plans A, B, and C. I was like all ready to. So I made 2 days of recording, so I didn't have to play. If the first day didn't work out, I had another day. I didn't have to play the whole thing all at once. And I would practice with this is how quadrants came about. Actually, was that I would practice with an hourglass that was 15 minutes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In order to try to keep, several things to try to keep a thread going through the improvisation. Try to see if I could keep the endurance going through the improvisation. Because playing trumpet for 15 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
But of course, you can pace yourself. You don't have to play the whole time. And that was one of the things that I was trying to do. Was trying to figure out could a piece still make sense. Instead of like that feeling like, oh, he's stopping because he has to, or whatever, But anyway, so I had my first plan, which was go in and make several shorter recordings, just basically play and make pieces, with no particular time two and then and so all those, the first record, the clean feed record, are all those. There were two pieces, one that I dedicated to Laurie Frink that was based on a tone row. And I wanted to do something for her because she was so important to me as a person. And she passed a couple of years before that. I just wanted to acknowledge that. And then there was another piece that, the premeditated thought was, okay, I'm going to use a plunger. And, Clark Terry was always one of my heroes and somebody I got to know. So I, named that one after him. But that was the extent of the whole inspiration for it. So that record, I was basically done the first day with that. I had, it went really well. It was like, okay. I mean, the engineer, Ed Tatro, had everything so set up. It was amazing that it was a really comfortable space. I didn't have to feel like the main thing with the trumpet, I could really play soft, and he would get a lot of the sounds that you get on the soft end. And so I was like, oh, great, this is easy. So the second day I went back and I just did a few things. And then my other plan was to do quadrants, was to do 4 15-minute improvisations. So I said, at the end of the whole thing, I was like, okay, let's just try it. And so that's how that came off was,
okay.
And at the same time, I started thinking about just the 4 directions and what that represented to me at that moment, thinking about those directions. And, so I would use, like the South is, I use flugelhorn, and I always would think of like, it's hot and slow, and that kind of stuff, and like, there's a piccolo trumpet one on there that actually the piccolo trumpet one is funny because I think it's East actually because the way my piccolo was at the time, the third valve slide would come out really easily, but I didn't really think much of it. And as I was playing, the pressure kicked out the third valve slide, so it was totally out of the horn. And so as I was playing, I started hearing this sound. I was like, something's wrong. And so I just incorporated it. And it was like, okay, this is, it's something I might have chosen to do at some point, but it was like, okay, this was decided for me. So here we go. And it still worked out okay. So
that's amazing.
So that's how those records came down. But it was still, I'm still working the solo trumpet thing now. I've done a couple of gigs since then. Fortunately, none of them had to be an hour long, but but that's what I was striving for, because after I've done those, I was like, man, they need to be longer. I need to figure out how to keep this ball rolling. It's a hard thing, and I see how somebody like Peter and Nate, and they're really,
all these guys.
They do so many solo concerts, and they are able to keep it going. Like what I mean is, like when I get into the improvisations and I've done like maybe 4 or 5 pieces, it feels like the end. It's like this feels like this is the end. And so I as I do more of them, I'm going to try to figure out how to push against that to take it
further.
But I don't want, I don't want the listeners to just get bored with it. So that's why
exactly.
If it feels, if it feels like the end, it's gonna, they're gonna feel like it's the end. And if it feels like they want more, then they can come back.
No, it's so intimate. So, I mean, even for me, like playing solo guitar, and I have harmonically options. Of course, you have melody only. But already this is for me intimate, and I can imagine playing trumpet solo. It's even more. You're there with this tiny instrument, and it's like, well,
you definitely,
it's a special thing. I mean, I guess.
Well, you have to consider the space, right? It's like, because I'm not going to fill the whole space with sound all the time.
Yeah.
So I have to create a vibe where it's okay that there's silence.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes that's just in me. Like I have to be comfortable that I don't have to fill all the space all the time, and that, and I find that's really the hardest part of playing solo trumpet, is being willing to leave the space for the audience to, and the audience, like if you're okay with the space, the audience is usually okay with the space. But if I feel anxious about it, they're gonna think something's wrong,
Well, I feel it. Yeah.
So it's really heavy. I mean, like I find I really got to be in the right headspace for it, and it's a great challenge, and I think I think it's an important challenge to tackle, because playing solo as a horn player is like the greatest exercise, because it literally changed how I play with rhythm sections, because now I feel I feel more engaged in bringing things to the table, to the moment, and I'm also, because of that thing with the space, I'm also comfortable not playing.
Yeah.
So that changed things a lot, and that was a big lesson from listening to Wadada. He's the master of space, and it's just like that's I mean. That's a huge thing, I think, and it reminds me that, there's a famous quote from Dizzy Gillespie. It's like, the older you get, the more you learn what not to play. Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, I never thought that meant literally don't play.
But it's like this book, Mick Goodrick had this book, The Advancing Guitarist, and I still have it. I chewed it, it's like falling apart, but he has
I actually have that over here too.
I love that one. I love, of course, he's explaining in the first 60 pages all arpeggios, voicings, whatever, but I love the last 20 pages when it's just text, because he's really humorous. And then there's, I never forget, I explained this to my students, the use of space in music, and it's an empty page. It's nothing on it, you would expect, and it's just like, and I was like, yeah, exactly.
Well, it's kind of interesting, right? Because as a trumpet player, well, growing up, I wanted to always sound like a sax player or a piano player, and I wanted to fill the space and be like, okay, so I'm practicing, working on all this stuff, trying to be able to play this and fill the space, and then, but then it's not really idiomatic of the instrument to do that, right? Like the trumpet, there's, I mean, not just for technical reasons of endurance and all that, but just sonically, it's a powerful sound. So I guess that this space is actually a really important aspect of the trumpet that I didn't get until I started doing these solo trumpet things.
Interesting. Yeah, it's really important. Dave, I wanted to ask you also about, we talked now about your solo trumpet playing, but you've done so much work with other musicians also, not being a band leader, but and Andrew Hill, Mario Pavone, who sadly passed away, and some others. And I want to ask you about these, especially about The Beautiful Day with Andrew Hill. I've played a lot with John Hebert also, and he was such a close associate of Andrew. But I wanted to ask you your experience with Andrew. Like,
wow,
how was that like?
Oh, that was. I mean, that was one of the more memorable experiences. I'll never forget. I mean, I don't know. I can't really put it into words in one word, but I could say that he was such a special being. That so like I only worked with him in the big band format. So when you work when you're in a big band, there's a lot of other people around.
It's different.
But I don't know if anybody else had this experience with him, but I always felt like he made me feel like I was special, even though there's all these other people around, and everybody else has all these solos, and you never know. I was basically playing the lead trumpet parts. I think I had a solo on one thing. I think. And he just made you feel like you were the most important thing to his music. It was amazing. It was great, and I remember, like, so the thing about that particular record is Ron Horton actually deserves the bulk of the credit for making that happen, because he oversaw the charts. Andrew wrote this stuff, but Ron conducted the band, and he even had to stand in front of a band with a little whiteboard to write when the next section would come, because things would, it was very fluid. It was pretty interesting. And different people had different reactions to that in the band. Some people were very uncomfortable with the fact that we would now jump from letter A to letter L, and that. But that was just Andrew's vibe. He was very loose with how the music was going to happen. It was beautiful. I remember, like, in one of the rehearsals, we were playing a ballad, a real slow ballad, and Ron's counting it off, and we're playing it. And Andrew didn't really play much during the rehearsals or even during the gig. I think his piano solos were overdubbed after the record.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But this was incredible, because he was like, Ron's conducting the band really slow, and Andrew gets up and says, no, let me show you. This is how I want it. He'd go 1, 2, 3. And he would just conduct gesture to gesture, and it was I mean, if you watched him and followed him, it was awesome. But some cats weren't comfortable; they wanted to pulse, So, but we really got it from that. Like, he really wanted just this fluidity and moment to moment of the music. It was great.
Wow.
We got to do a bunch of gigs with that band. I remember the last one. I remember we did. What was that? The Jazz Standard, and for me it was one. I lived in like an hour out of the city at that time, so I was always the first one to all these gigs because I had the farthest to go. And I just remember getting there early, and there was Andrew sitting in the back room, and we just sat there and talked for like.
Oh wow, man, that's beautiful.
I'll never forget it. It was just like such a beautiful moment, and he was great, but. But anyway, that was John worked with him a lot, and
he told me lots of stuff about him. Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Yeah, I have this talk what we're doing now with Ron Horton next month,
Oh God, tell him I said hey.
Yeah, like the trumpet month, you know.
Oh great. Yeah.
No, I wanted to ask you about Andrew because I will also talk with Ron about Andrew. I mean, they did a lot together also, so
Yeah.
it's beautiful. I also wanted to ask about Mario, and I listened to the other day to Vertical, the record you did. I mean, of course, it's like Tony is there and Oscar Noriega and Mike Serene and all these incredible players. But how did your story with Mario begin? And I mean, I think he's one of the most underrated bass players and composers. I mean, us musicians know about him so much, and
Yeah.
but how was that story with him?
Well, I mean, I'm glad you brought up Vertical because that's one of my favorite records that I ever did with him. I mean, and the last one, Blue Vertical, is amazing too. But Vertical was we did a lot of work together on that one. Like,
really?
I did all the arrangements for all the horns and.
Oh wow, really? I didn't know that. Okay.
And he wrote the tunes and I did the arrangements and also helped mix with that one. That was one of my favorite records. And there's a ballad on there. I can't remember the names of any of them because he would tell me he would give me like the working title and then I would see the record and it would be this other name and I'd be like, I don't know what tune that is, and I have to go back and like find it, But there's a ballad on there. It starts off with him playing and then it's a long and there's a Malaby solo, and he didn't want to put it on the record because it didn't really work as a take, And
okay.
so he was like, I'm going to leave that off. And so I finally, no, you got to put that on there. And then we ended up like doing some little editing magic to make it work, and it worked. I was so glad it got on there. But anyway, how I started working with Mario was he originally called me to sub for Ron Horton, of all things, at the Litchfield Jazz Camp.
Oh, wow, okay.
This was probably around 2006 or something like that. And so I went up and I taught a couple days and we connected, had a great thing. He started a composer's workshop at that camp that was, it's really special. It's the most jazz camps deal with very, kind of straight ahead jazz and here's the blues and play this and this. And he started this workshop there where it was really talking about, he called it downtown music, but it's mostly music of, something that doesn't fit that category so specifically, something that has more open improvisation or stuff like that. So that's where we first connected. And then he asked me to arrange a couple tunes for this. I think it's Orange Double Tenor. It's the record with Malaby and Jimmy Green.
Yeah.
And so that was where I started. Yeah. So then I arranged a couple of the pieces for him there. He wasn't really a schooled musician, so he had people help him write the music. Like he would come up with these bass lines that he could play, which I was always blown away by how he could do this because they weren't really conventional in any sense of the imagination. Yeah. But he could remember them and play them, and so they were, in a way, he was a lot like a folk musician. He would find this melody that he wrote, and then he would play it, and he would just keep playing it till he really learned it and heard it, and had his different ways of doing that, depending on the fretboard of the bass and all that. And so he would then ask people to help him notate it, and then maybe add a part or arrange it. So. Like Stephen Bernstein did it for a long time, and Marty Ehrlich, and Peter McCarran, and Michael Musalami. They all had, Peter Mattson also worked with them a lot. But then, after that Orange Double Tenor, he and I started working together a lot. And so he would send me, like a recording of him playing his bass part and a piece of paper where he wrote what he thought the notes were and thought the rhythms were, and then I would try to transcribe it, and then we'd have a conversation. And
oh wow, okay,
he'd say like, okay, I want a melody on top of this, and then I'd write something, and most of the time
Wow.
I mean, it was, I would say probably 95% of the time, what I came up with the first time was just what he wanted. And occasionally there would be like, yeah, it's a little too much there, and we would work it out. And so it was that kind of process. You know, he
Oh,
was
wow.
like the final editor of it, and I would come up and just make parts based. You know, I would come up with things not so much based on what I wanted, but more like what I thought he wanted,
Yeah.
and based on the kind of harmonies that he would write and the rhythms that he would write and all that. And so,
Interesting.
you know, up until he passed, I did most of the stuff that he did. You know, did a bunch of the trio stuff, the vertical trio and the arc trio,
Yeah, Arthur is beautiful.
dialect trio, I guess. I'm sorry, but yeah, I learned a lot from that, though. I mean, he like I said, he kind of had like this folk musician kind of quality to him, if that makes sense, you know.
No,
But the
no,
mu-
what you mean? Yeah,
but the music didn't fit like, you know, anything that you would call folk music, you know. But it was definitely creative roots music, I guess,
yeah,
you know. And you know, we'd have a lot of conversations about the work, and just keep doing the work, and you know, if recognition comes, that's great, but we need to get this, you know, this is an expression that I need to get out, and to do that. So yeah, it was great.
beautiful.
But I
Yeah.
also arranged some of his stuff for big band, so there's
Oh,
some of
really?
those there too that you know, that we did a lot of things. It was great. Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. I really didn't know that. Wow. Yeah, wow, beautiful.
Yeah, and like I say, the last two records were, I mean, it's a real testament to the power of music, because he was failing. You know, his energy was dwindling, and you know, we started in about December of I guess it was 2020, I guess, and you know, we started that process. He'd send me these tunes, and we were working on them and coming up with stuff. And he had two sessions that he wanted to do. One was in February with the Tampa Quartet, and so we finished that stuff. And he went and did the session, and then we did the session in March with Tyshawn and Matt
Yeah.
Mitchell, and you know, that was a 2-day session, and you know, I had to carry his bass for him, and
Oh, wow.
he drove himself one day to the session himself. So, but after that, I have to say that the biggest thing that was amazing was that the everybody involved, the engineers, the record companies, everybody, they all knew the situation. Also, Kevin Whitehead was a big influence in this too, because he was able to put these interviews together that became the NPR piece and all that. And everybody knew the situation, and they fast tracked that record.
Mm.
Both of those records. So he heard the final masters before he passed,
Oh, wow. Okay.
and you know, approved them all. And so I was just glad that happened, because at least we could do that for him. But the power of music was amazing. It just lifted him up, and
Sure.
you know, I'd carry his bass for him, and he'd get in the booth, and he'd be there, and then we'd start playing, and it was just like, okay, here we go, you know,
Wow.
and just and next take, boom, and first day he just pounded out these things. It was like it was incredible. Yeah,
That's beautiful. Wow.
Matt and Tyshawn and I were all just like, wow, incredible.
Wow.
He's just there.
Incredible. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, beautiful. Thanks for sharing this. I mean, yeah, it's didn't know this stuff. You know, I just listened to the records not even as a musician, as a, you know, fan or music lover.
Yeah.
It's nice to hear this background also. So, yeah. Dave, not to take too much of your time, just one question about a rare bird in your discography. Is like, I wanted to ask you about the Cactus of Knowledge with Rabih.
Oh God, yeah, yeah.
Because how did that, you know, I played with so many musicians who worked with Rabih, and you know, they told me about all these incredible long charts and
Oh yeah.
bizarre rhythms. And how was your experience with him, and how did you enter that world? I mean, that's a bizarre one.
That gig that changed my life. That gig, I gotta tell you, that was so I won't take too much of your time, but I'll give you the whole
No,
story.
no, please.
It's really fascinating. So here I was subbing on a Broadway show. No, I was playing a Broadway show. I had my own show then, And I used to have to take the train home after the show, so it would be like 11:30 at night, and so here I am walking to the train station, and my cell phone rings, and I don't recognize the number, and I'm just like, okay, so I answer it, and it's like this guy goes, hey, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I can't understand anything he's saying. And I'm like, so who are you? He goes, Rabih Abou-Khalil. I'm like, okay, cool. He said, I have this session. Now I kind of recognize the name because there was a record with Kenny Wheeler on it. Somebody had showed me Blue Camel.
Blue Camel, exactly. Yeah.
So I was like, is this that guy? He goes, yeah, this is that guy. He says, I have a rehearsal tomorrow morning at like 11, and I had to do another matinee the next day. So I was like, okay. And he said, can you do this rehearsal? And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. And so I didn't realize that this was like an audition for the gig, right?
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I show up to this rehearsal, and there's like his band and these 5 horn players, Ellery and
Antonio Hart, I think,
Antonio Hart and Tom Varner, and here's this, and Nabil Kuwait was at the rehearsal, which is kind of unusual too. He's the hand drummer, right?
Yeah.
And here it is, like all this stuff, 10:16, and I'm like, what the hell is this? And so I start playing, and I'm like, kind of just listening, and he's telling me some things about how to, so anyway, he liked the way I played, and he said, great, you want to do the gig? And I was like, what's the gig? He's like, okay, so we're gonna go to Cologne, and we're gonna record for a week at the Cologne radio station,
yeah.
And then we're gonna do some gigs. And I'm like, great, I'm in, cool, no problem. And he said, I'll send you the music. So then he sends me the music. And this is before we had like, demos and things to really listen to stuff.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I have no idea what the hell is going on here. What do you do? Right. So I shedded that stuff like nothing, like nobody's business. And I listened to the way he told me to do it, which it was 10:16, but he said,
but where the offbeats are, and yeah,
you feel it in 2. It's like he calls it a Georgina, 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3.
Yeah.
Da, da, da. And of course, the horn players had all the ticks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which is like, that's impossible to play if you're not playing the whole thing, right? So I had this little I forget what they call them. It's like a Yamaha sequencer, right? And I programmed all the music into this sequencer. It took hours because he gave us a score. So I put all the music in the sequencers, and I just listened to it over and over and over. I spent months, and I started practicing. And so we got to the gig in the session, and I was okay. I wasn't 100%. He was like, I was practicing with a sequencer, right? We get to the gig, Nabil, who's the hand drummer, he's got like this swing on it. It's like, it's not metronomic, it's got like, sometimes it's a little this, sometimes a little that. So like I had to totally listen to the hand drummer the whole time. And that helped. So it was great. My God, I learned so much from that. And then the other cats like Michel Godard and the clarinet player.
Gabriele Mirabassi.
Yeah. Oh my God, they were just incredible. And so the funny part was like, when we did a little tour or had that hanging out in Cologne, the American guys are doing their thing, and I'm hanging out with those guys, and I only speak English, right? So they're like, they must have been get a kick out of me, but it was hilarious. We'd sitting at dinner, and Michelle is like tasting the wine, sending it back, and this and that, and I'm like, God, this is crazy. So that was a great.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, and I mean Rabih, he was a great guy to me, man. He was really cool because, even when 9/11 happened, he called me from.
Oh, really? Oh, wow, man.
And he's like, man, it's going to be cool. This would happen in my hometown all the time in Beirut. And he's like, just, it's going to be tough, but hang in there. It's going to be good, and you're going to be all right. And that's one of the things I really kind of regret was that we didn't do much more after that. We had talked about, playing, me doing some other stuff with his band and all, but it never materialized. But
yeah, I love that record. It's beautiful because it's such a strange mix of you creative New York guys with this European creative guys, and then his Lebanese or Eastern influence, and it's like really, it can work.
Yeah,
it sounds beautiful. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's There was have you seen the video with that? There was like a video.
Really?
I think it's on YouTube. Yeah, there was a video of some of the tracks. They did a whole production thing. It looks really good though. It's really pretty awesome. Yeah.
Well,
no, I learned a lot from that gig. That was fun. Yeah.
Wow. Cool. Thank you, Dave. Thanks for sharing some of these stories. So beautiful. Nice to listen.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to do this, and it's a pleasure to speak with you. I hope we.
Dr. Jazz.